So ever since the original trailer for it was shown off at Gamescom about a year ago, I've been hyped for Atlas Fallen. That first CGI trailer definitely had that secret sauce to make my lizard brain very happy, and to make it even better, they showed off a tiny snippet of gameplay at the end as well. Since that moment though, I've been intrigued about this game and knew that I needed to play it so I could learn more about it. I typically avoid most trailers after maybe one or two that I see for a game so I can go into it as blind as possible, and that's exactly what I did for Atlas Fallen as well. I dove into this game with no idea or expectations other than what I saw from that first reveal trailer. I knew it had big weapons, sand surfing, and big monsters to battle as well. But now, I've played through the entire game and let me tell you, this game is surprisingly awesome. So sit back, relax, grab some popcorn, and let me show you exactly what Atlas Fallen is all about. So we're going to separate this review into a few categories: story, gameplay, world, and performance. I will also save my criticisms for the end before I give you my overall rating for the game. And don't worry, this video will include no story spoilers at all, especially anything after the very beginning of the game. But let's just jump in and give you a quick rundown of the story and the premise of Atlas Fallen. So Atlas Fallen takes place in a mythical fantasy world named Atlas. Atlas is currently being controlled by a tyrannical god named Thelos. Thelos has taken control over the entire area and has started siphoning a valuable material from the planet called Essence. Essence is the lifeblood of Atlas, but Thelos has used his obsessive fanatics to harvest the world's essence and perform rituals with it. And with the lack of essence and Thelos' wraiths running rampant, destroying things and killing people, not only are humans dying to starvation, the plant life and vegetation can't survive, but the humans have also turned on each other. You play a nameless protagonist who turns into the savior of all mankind because of this powerful gauntlet. Your character basically has a rags to riches story where you start as the lowest social class known as an unnamed, which are essentially maids, lackeys, or shall we call them unpaid interns if you catch my drift. But after you discover the mysterious gauntlet, everything changes. Your character gains incredible strength, the ability to jump multiple times, and even dash through the air. But not only that, you can suddenly conjure massive weapons from the sands around you, and you can lift ancient buried structures out of the ground to open up more pathways of exploration. And so thanks to the otherworldly artifact and your novel supernatural abilities, you take it upon yourself to take back control of Atlas and restore the lands to how they once were before the Great War that let Thelos take reign. The entire map is covered in ruins from an era of civilization before the Great War, and as you play through the game, you will explore these ruins in search of shards and pieces of this gauntlet to increase its power back to its true form. You'll also meet characters with their own lore and backstories and how they connect to the world around you, and to the gauntlet itself. I was actually surprised just how much dialogue was in this game. It reminded me of something like Horizon Zero Dawn, where you explore ruins of an ancient civilization, discovering lore files that paint a picture of how things were before the big collapse. But on top of the lore that you can discover about the world, almost every person you meet has several dialogue options you can choose to explain the state of the world, current world events, or why certain rituals exist and the purposes behind them, and of course much more. So if you're willing to spend the time searching for all the lore files in the game or talking to different people, the game will help immerse you into its atmosphere and makes you understand the depth of the world around you. The game features a main questline, side quests, and errands you can accept as well, which is pretty typical stuff for most open-world RPGs, but during my playthrough I wanted to see how good the content actually was, because there's no point in doing content that is just basic fetch quests over and over and over again. So I did try most of the content available, doing everything that I could along the way. And let me tell you that if you're a completionist, you will actually have a lot of fun in this game. It has so many side quests for you to pick up and try, ranging in size from helping someone deliver a love letter to their crush, all the way to adventuring off into a dangerous part of the world to check on people who went missing. And the errands you pick up are typically smaller things like catching the apples that a thief stole from a market and returning them. But I have to say, as a completionist myself, I did not actually get bored of doing the side content in Atlas Fallen. They did pull me in and make me so immersed that I wanted to do more. And if you explore enough early on, you can actually complete the side missions before even getting to them. For example, if a mission wants you to clear out a pack of enemies near the town, but you've already killed those enemies, your character just says something like, "Oh, those enemies, I've already killed them, so they shouldn't be a problem for you anymore." And the NPC gives you a big thank you, hands over your rewards, and you go on your way. That can actually happen for a bunch of missions, and it's super satisfying when it actually happens. You feel kind of good about yourself. But again, that is not really anything new or groundbreaking for an open world RPG game, but it is a nice feature to see. And like I mentioned before, each NPC can have several dialogue options that you can select in order to learn more about the quests they offer or to learn more about the world and its lore. But speaking of dialogue, I should mention the voice acting, because the voice acting is not going to win awards, but it is certainly not the worst that I've ever heard. There was hardly a moment that really broke my immersion due to bad voice acting, and if I had to liken it to something, I would say the voice acting in Atlas Fallen could be considered dubbed anime level, where some characters are super over the top and some are just a bit flat on their deliveries, but overall, I did find it enjoyable. And super small thing that I noticed about the game real quick, I think they got the Gambit guy from Destiny to do a voiceover for a character in this game. There's a vendor in the game that can appear, and I think he voices this vendor. Let me know if you think he sounds similar enough, but I'm pretty sure they got the Drifter to voice this guy.
Alright. Let's see what we've got. Fallen on the horizon. I had a woman sell me a strange instrument I never saw before recently. Can you top that and get me some artisan tools for extra pay?
But the writing for each character ranges from average to absolutely hilarious. Some NPCs have pop culture memes thrown in there as well.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and it gets everywhere, like in my damn food.
And some characters are written in such a way that you'll either love them or you'll hate them.
Arif told me about you, so to speak. I try to keep things in order here, so to speak. We are working to get them away to cross, so to speak. 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 So to speak.
There are moments in this game where the dialogue seems similar to something like a Borderlands game, so to speak. Like the game is self-aware and doesn't take itself too seriously, or moments where they inject a bit of humor into the banter between your character and other NPCs. There were definitely moments that made me smirk, giggle, or actually laugh out loud because a comment did catch me off guard.
I just gave you the passphrase.
Hush, 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 hush. Do you want them to kill me? I need more than this.
As for me, I'm gonna find a quiet little place to settle down. No more thieving for me. And I mean, no more legitimate business. Farewell.
And the characters that you meet in the world seem fantastically written as well. You will meet that guy who you're supposed to hate, the person who is the lovable goofball, characters who will thumb their nose at you because you're just a lowly unnamed, and people who are completely blown away by your magical prowess. The game does a fantastic job though of making that transition between unnamed to gauntlet bearer feel natural. But as always, this is purely subjective and some people may not like the voice acting and may find it cringy or something, but for me, I thought it was pretty delightful. Atlas Fallen also does offer dialogue choices so you can choose how to handle certain situations, but don't expect anything like Detroit Become Human though. You cannot influence the ending of the story, but they do give you enough freedom to where if you don't play your cards right, you can actually make the quest giver or certain NPCs mad at you. It didn't seem like you could screw yourself out of a reward completely, it was more like choosing sides. The side that you chose gave you the reward instead of the other side just got upset at you. This does open the door for doing a second playthrough to see what other rewards were, or for anybody who Googles the choices in their games before making them, you'll have fun with this one as well. Okay, so we've covered the story, quests, and NPCs of the game. Let's talk about the most important aspect of good games, the gameplay. The gameplay of Atlas Fallen is what sets it apart from the games of this generation, but also from the other games that Deck 13 has previously made. Because if you take a second to analyze Deck 13's portfolio from the last few years, we'll see they co-developed the original Lords of the Fallen, which was actually one of the first Souls-like games that I can recall at least, but it had mixed reviews due to the fact that it felt like they were aping Dark Souls instead of actually using it for inspiration. Then we've got the Surge 1 and 2, which are futuristic Souls-like games. The Surge was Deck 13's answer to people telling them to make their own Souls-like game. And so what made the Surge special was the gameplay. The game was an action-packed Souls-like, but in order to get specific pieces of gear that you wanted, you had to target specific body parts and cut them off of your enemies. So it almost had like a Monster Hunter vibe to it. So you have a studio who has made 3 brutally hard Souls-like experiences, but what kind of game is Atlas Fallen? Well, it's actually not a Souls-like at all. It's actually an open-world action RPG. Atlas Fallen is a huge departure for Deck 13 as they try something new. It's more akin to something like Darksiders 2, Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning, or even something like the original God of War games. So if you were to describe this game's gameplay in like a basic elevator pitch, you would say something like using a powerful magical gauntlet to conjure massive weapons and enlarge and get broader movelets as you build up momentum from killing big beasts. The more momentum that you get, the more active and passive effects you get while fighting, changing the course of your battle. You explore shockingly large areas with massive verticality and minimal invisible walls, so you get a true sense of freedom while using the gauntlet's magical abilities to unearth giant structures and open up new pathways to explore. And it gives the player a true power fantasy as you watch the size of your enemies get bigger and bigger, and you just keep smacking them down with your newly acquired arsenal of weaponry. So just like how the Surge's hook was targeted loot farming by choosing specific body parts to attack, Atlas Fallen's hook is the momentum bar. To explain the momentum bar in more detail though, as you attack and kill enemies you gain momentum. But the more momentum that you gain, the more damage you take. So there's a high risk, high reward factor to building up momentum. As you gain momentum though, you activate more and more active and passive effects that you have chosen specifically. These active and passive effects are called Essence Stones. You find Essence Stones by killing big beasts, completing missions, opening chests, and more. And there's over 150 Essence Stones to collect and use. This is where the main RPG sense comes from. The Essence Stones are rated by bronze, silver, and gold tiers. These rating tiers tell you where you can slot them in on your momentum bar. So the bronze Essence Stones activate first, then silver, and then the gold Essence Stones activate last, as they usually are the craziest effects you can find. But you will also see two different icons for Essence Stones as well, square ones and then the diamond ones. The square Essence Stones are your passive boosts, so as long as you have enough momentum built up, they will be active. And the diamond-shaped Essence Stones are your active boosts, so when you get into a new segment of the momentum bar, they call that ascending. When you ascend, you unlock that new ability. It's like gaining a skill the more momentum that you actually have. So if you only have one bar of momentum, you only get the actives and passives from that first segment. But if you have a full momentum bar, you are gaining all of the passives at once, and you can activate all of your new skills whenever they're off of cooldown. The momentum bar and Essence Stones mean that you can fully control your character's abilities and conform the combat to feel however you want it to feel. But there's also idols and perk points you can use as well. Idols are the bottom icon you see there in green. As you hit and kill enemies, you gain energy towards your idol. This is what heals you, but you can also add new effects to your idol on top of the healing as well. And like I mentioned, you do have a small perk tree that you can invest perk points into. The perk point tree is not the best that I've ever seen. It's nothing amazing, but I do think there are some really cool stuff to invest your points into. The perk tree has 12 options to choose from, but some options actually have 3 tiers to them, allowing you to upgrade those perks multiple times to increase the effects of them. And you gain perk points by upgrading your armor sets in the game. So in Atlas Fallen, armor sets don't offer you individual pieces per body part, but instead offer a full body armor set. But each armor set has a distinct stat roll that comes on them, with a mainlined passive boost you gain when the armor is fully upgraded. And if you slot enough specific Essence Stones of different types into your momentum bar, you can actually gain even more stats on your armors like a boost. And each set of armor has 3 upgrade levels you can unlock. Each upgrade level gives you upgraded stats and a perk point for the perk tree. So by the end of the game, I had 8 armor sets all maxed out with 3 upgrades, which allowed me to almost max out the entire perk tree as well. But shockingly, this game actually gives you the option to customize all of your armors visually. So you can select each body part and dye it different colors with a wide color palette to choose from. But you can also adorn special ornaments and decorations to your armor, in addition to the full transmog system as well. So as you earn more armor sets in the game, you can still choose the armor you want visually and customize it to your liking. On top of the armor sets, the idols, the Essence Stones, and the perk tree, you also have individual pieces to collect that will upgrade your gauntlet's abilities. So in order to unlock more mid-air dash charges, you need to find all of the dash shards and the main dash piece itself. And the same goes for all the other abilities your gauntlet has as well, like the ability to unearth ancient structures. When you first start out in the game, you can lift some things out of the ground, but you will find other objects are too heavy to lift and require all of the unearthed pieces in order to actually lift it out of the ground. This will create a Metroidvania-style gameplay loop that we see in a lot of modern games nowadays, where as you unlock more abilities, you need to go back and do a bit of backtracking to complete objectives that you previously couldn't, or to explore new passageways you are able to actually open now. But we will go more into the map in just a moment. First, I want to discuss with you the weapons you can equip in the game, because there are 3 weapons you can unlock inside of Atlas Fallen: the Dune Cleaver, Sand Whip, and Knuckle Duster. Each weapon has multiple stages for the amount of momentum that you actually have. So if you have no momentum, you get the base form. Then at 2 bars of momentum, you get another form. And if you get all 3 bars of momentum, you get the 3rd and final form of those weapons. The Knuckle Duster was my favorite weapon to use outside of the Sand Whip, purely because I typically like to get up close and personal with my weapons in games. I also love a faster attack speed. And with the Knuckle Duster, you get a crazy fast attack speed, and it seems to do really high damage output compared to the other weapons due to its close range. But the transformation it goes through when you get more momentum is just giving you more and more arms to punch with, and the arms get bigger and bigger too. Each weapon has their own combos and attack moves that you can use, and you can seamlessly blend between different weapons during combat, and the animations of combat are stellar. Here's some footage that I captured at 120 FPS slowed down to 50% speed to truly show you the quality of the combat animations. They really nailed the power fantasy of swinging colossal weapons the size of a small car. Deck 13 also managed to execute incredibly smooth controls for the combat while taking a page out of the playbook for one of the best action fighting games of all time, God of War. So on controller, pressing the X button swings your main weapon, and pressing the Y button swings your secondary weapon. You can also press the right trigger to do an attack that launches you airborne, allowing you to string combos together on the ground or in the air as well. And then if you press the right trigger again while in the air, you perform a slam onto the ground that can actually unearth some of the enemies that burrow into the ground during combat. And actually, speaking of the enemies, we should talk about the different types of enemies within Atlas Fallen as well, because there are 16 different types of enemies that you can actually see in the game, all with their own mechanics. Some of them are intended to be more fodder, and some take up half the screen. Starting out in the beginning, you just see a few of the enemy types, similar to like Doom, but as you progress further into the region, you start to see more and more enemy variations. And as I indicated earlier, each enemy has their own mechanics to learn. For instance, the divers are worm-like creatures, and during combat they tend to sink into the ground and then pop up in a random location or right beneath you. While when they plunge into the ground, if you do a leaping slam attack, you can actually expose them and make them pop out of the ground into a stunned state. And when they go into that stunned state, they expose their tail, which usually has special rewards when you destroy that body part. Or similarly, the cloakers will typically run away from you and activate their stealth, turning invisible. But if you damage them while they're invisible, it stuns them and lets you kill them easier as well. And the same can be said for the high majority of the enemies in the game. There's either a combat pattern for what moves they will do, or there's a mechanic that you can use to stun them and make them more vulnerable. And as I briefly brought up earlier, I did mention the diver's tail offering special rewards if you destroy that body part. This is a result of that Deck 13 DNA coming through. They carried over a very similar version of that mechanic from the Surge, but with a slight twist. So in Atlas Fallen, you will notice that monsters can have a golden health bar on certain body parts, and when you destroy that body part, they will either drop upgrade materials or they will drop you an Essence Stone. These Essence Stones they drop you provide a new Essence Stone ability or passive that you previously did not have before. They're kind of exclusive drops in that sense. They create a reason for you to actually attack the golden body parts first, and furthermore give you a reason to learn the special mechanics of the enemies as well. Because if we look at the example of the diver again, their special loot's on their tail, and they don't often show their tails unless you do the ground slam and stun them. So I've explained the momentum system, Essence Stones, idols, perks, armor sets, and the basics of the combat with weapons and enemies, but there's still one more thing I didn't talk about yet, and that's shattering. This is a very simple, yet incredibly sovereign and unyielding ultimate ability you perform at the cost of your full momentum bar. Just by pressing your two triggers together causes you to spend all of the momentum that you've accrued for a massive attack. The attack you perform is actually determined by the weapon that you have selected as your main X button attack, and depending on how much momentum you have when you cast the ability, it can cause extreme damage. And one cool detail the game shows you is that if the enemy that you are fighting can die by shattering them, their health bar will glow blue. And as I mentioned before, the more momentum that you actually have, the more damage you take. So executing a shatter will let you control how much damage you actually want to take by resetting your momentum bar, but at the cost of losing your Essence Stones effects as well. I do also think it's noteworthy to mention that Deck 13 really thought of everything, because they give you the option to have 3 presets for your momentum bar, the weapons you want equipped, and your current idols too. That means if you want to experiment with some new Essence Stones you just found or a new idol that you just got, all you have to do is make a second preset with new additions. And you can switch them out on demand during gameplay as well, just by pressing the left trigger and using the D-pad to change your presets. Ultimately though, the gameplay and combat of Atlas Fallen is quite extensive. There are lots of aspects to experiment with as you play, lots of fun abilities to gain and try out, and once you get a good grip on the combat, the game feels immaculate. And in my opinion, the sand surfing in Atlas Fallen is akin to the flying in Anthem. It's one of those core features that make the game feel unique, right alongside the free-flowing combat and the momentum bar as well. If you were to strip away any of these exquisite features, they would undoubtedly dilute the experience of the game, robbing it of that enchantment that makes it truly extraordinary. And speaking of extraordinary, let's talk about the world design. I love what they did for the world design of Atlas Fallen. There are vast open spaces and minimal invisible walls, so you have complete freedom to roam around, parkour, and climb onto whatever you want to. And the sense of scale is really fantastic because it gives you that chance to really stretch your legs and feel the speed of the sand surfing. And when you combine the sand surfing with multiple jumps and the in-air dashes, you can actually clear extremely large gaps with ease. You can really feel the thought they put into making each area feel exciting to roam around with because of the large open spaces, the super tall structures to climb, and only a hint of fall damage. And for you completionists out there, the game will either be super fun or super annoying to grab every last collectible. The developers have really gone out of their way to hide little artifacts all over the dang map, more so than I feel like other developers do. But in my opinion, I found it to be a great choice simply because it really gives you a desire to explore all of the edges of the map just to see if there's something to collect. And more often than not, you will actually find some sort of loot out there. And these artifacts that you can collect in the game are important because they are sold to merchants for extra gold, which is also known as tributes in the game. So the more that you explore the map to find all the collectibles, the more money you'll actually have. But not only that, the game hides loot chests all over as well. The loot chests can give you gold and essence stones. So it really is extremely recommended to venture out and explore all over the world, testing the limits of the verticality because you can be rewarded for doing so. In the world, you will also find small patches of forests with some animals roaming around in it. These tiny patches of green serve as a way to get hidden treasure. You just tap into your inner hunter and slowly, quietly stalk the animals until one of them makes a shimmering sound and turns golden. When they do that, just follow the animals for a bit and watch where they dig up some buried treasure. This feature gives even more depth to the world as you attempt to not startle the animals while trying to follow them to the treasure. And there's honestly just so much to see and a surprising amount to do within the world, even though it's not as quest heavy as something like Skyrim and not as massive as something like The Witcher 3 or Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Notably though, while it may not be for all, I do think Deck 13 has done a fantastic job in the game with different activities for the player without it feeling boring or repetitive. And, of course, backing up the world design for each region of the world is incredible art direction. While the game is not photorealistic, it has incredible graphics that showcase the small dense forests, the underground cities, or the desolate sand dunes with large jagged rock formations jutting out from the ground extremely well. And even though we're going to get more into the technical details during the performance section, the engine they used for this game and the engineers who designed it definitely deserve major kudos. Even though the game does face the common challenge that many others do when it comes to portraying dark areas properly, they have managed to execute it pretty well. But the bright and sunny outdoors is where the game really shines. Watching your characters surf through the sands or swinging their overcompensators around in the bright, beautiful midday sun is absolutely spectacular. Seeing a beautiful sunset over an ocean cliff is just breathtaking. Or watching the golden sun rays pierce through the trees and the small patches of forest during the golden hour of daylight, it all looks fantastic. Texture quality is surprisingly high, foliage and vegetation look decent enough, and the engine does great at handling all of the particles and light sources at the same time. So as I said though, the game does not feature photorealistic graphics, but it does look absolutely amazing regardless. And as for the game's engine, it's Unreal. How everyone thinks this game is using Unreal Engine. Deck 13 deserve extra praise for not only going out of their way to design a new game that completely switches their genre, the engineers deserve praise for designing their own in-house engine as well, which is never an easy task and in most cases can add on an extra 2 to 4 years of development, depending on the scope of the game. And seeing the scope of Atlas Fallen compared to the linearity of The Surge, I'd say the engineers had their work cut out for them. Their engine looks so good in fact that most people, including myself, assumed it was running on some form of Unreal Engine 4 or 5, which is honestly a huge compliment, but it was later confirmed that it was indeed running on an in-house engine they made called the Fledge engine. So for all the engineers that shed a tear when all the reviewers and journalists kept claiming their hard work was just Unreal Engine, I see you, we salute you, great work. But that actually leads us perfectly into the next topic, which is performance. Now, because I did play an early version of the game, the day one patch was not out to fix some of the performance issues that I did experience in my playthrough. So when you download and play the game, there should be a day one patch available that should address some of the issues I experienced in my playthrough. But that being said, my experience was honestly pretty great. There's only a handful of things I could call out, but I will try to keep it light and leave the big boy testing for the professionals like Digital Foundry. So first things first though, I was playing the game on my personal gaming and streaming PC, which has a Ryzen 9 5950X, 32GB of 3600MHz RAM, and an RTX 4090. The game was also installed on my PCIe Gen 4 980 Pro M.2 SSD, and I only play the game at 1080p because my main gaming monitor is a 1080p 144Hz monitor. but I did test this game out in 1440p and 4K as well to gather a wide variety of benchmarks for all of you. So as you'd expect for a system with a 4090 playing at 1080p, this game was hilariously CPU bottlenecked in a couple of areas. But the surprising part is, though, the game actually knows how to properly utilize the 4090, unlike most modern titles. During my tests, I was seeing GPU usage of 70% and higher even at 1080p while my VRAM stayed under 10GB. I also ran a benchmark through one of the toughest areas I experienced in the game, which is in the town area here. I ran through at 1080p with ultra settings, 1440p with ultra settings, and 4K with ultra settings. And I even did a 4K test with DirectX 12 instead of the Vulkan API that they have by default. And DirectX 12 definitely gave me a lower FPS across the board. None of these tests though have AMD FSR 2 turned on, and as you can see, when I increase the resolution, the frame rate stays the same. There is still a bit of pop-in with certain assets as well, but I have been told that that should be fixed in the day one patch. So because the frame rate does not actually increase in the city area very much when dropping down to 1080p, that does tell me that this area is CPU limited very, very heavily due to the NPCs and everything that's happening in it. But in the end, all three resolutions provide a very playable experience that doesn't even come close to something like Hogwarts Legacy, where I had drops to 20 FPS due to the game saturating all 10GB of VRAM on my RTX 3080. And you won't see this game trying to use 21GB of VRAM on a 4090 like Diablo 4 does. All it will take is a quick settings change and this game should run fine on most modern hardware. In fact, here's the Steam hardware recommendation for Atlas Fallen. Even the minimum for the game is actually pretty great in my opinion. I love it when the developers really take the time to give you a performance target alongside the recommended and minimum specs for a game, so you know that if you have like 6-year-old hardware that's low end, you are still able to play this game at 1080p, at low settings, at 30 FPS as well. And for me, in most areas of the game, I was seeing 80 FPS or higher, and in the beginning areas of the game, I was seeing well over 100 FPS basically all the time. So in conclusion, the game's performance is very good, but does have some issues that will hopefully be solved by the day one patch, like the pop-in issues and the lower FPS in DirectX 12. But I did not experience anything too game-breaking. Alright, now I think it's time to say some of my criticisms that I have for the game. I don't actually have many criticisms for the game, but I do have a few things that I wished worked better. Mainly the game's lock-on. I found the game's lock-on incredibly awkward to use, and in most cases just made combat harder due to the fact that it kept switching targets all the time on its own. So if they can fix the lock-on system a bit more to make it more consistent and stay on target more, that would make the combat feel so much better, especially when trying to target specific body parts. The other big issue I found about the game is that flying enemies are super hard to hit in a lot of situations, especially when using the knuckle dusters. Whether you use the sand whip's hook feature to pull yourself closer or the airborne attack to launch yourself up, flying enemies often just are slightly out of reach all the time. And the knuckle duster does have lunge on each attack, but it seems to just break on flying enemies. Most notably, the tail whip enemies. Those guys can suck an egg. The tail whips would not only remain out of reach from you like all the other flying enemies would, but they also have this maneuver that they would do where they drop to the ground and start shooting blue goo that drains your momentum. But when they do that maneuver, you don't follow them or lunge downwards towards them at all. So your options are to stop attacking and let yourself fall a bit to be on their level, or to try to use the sand whip's hook ability again to pull yourself down. It got annoying really quickly, and I actually started to try to avoid fighting tail whips whenever possible. Another smaller criticism that isn't really a huge deal, but is something I wanted to really note here because it's worth mentioning, is the armors. While the armor system I detailed before is great, it does have one tiny flaw that I noticed. So when you have an armor set that you really like, it has all the best stats that you want to prioritize, you can't just upgrade that set of armor to a higher level. You are forced into using the new set of armor just because its base level is higher and can scale to a higher level than your current armor. It creates a system that forces you to wear armor with stats and bonuses that you may not be super happy with because you're trying to prioritize offensive instead of shattered, but you have to wear the new armor since the level is higher. But at least they do give you the armor transmog so you can skin it to look the same as your previous armor that you already had on. But honestly, that's pretty much the entire list of things that I found while playing that I didn't really enjoy very much. But these are all purely subjective and may not be a big deal to all of you at all. Okay, so now that I've covered the story, quests, NPCs, gameplay, combat, inventory, world design, graphics, and the performance, it's time for me to give you my overall rating of Atlas Fallen. So what would I rate this game out of 10? I would say this game is easily an 8 out of 10. Deck 13 has done a fantastic job creating something that feels new but also familiar. They've definitely poured a lot of love into this game, and you can feel the time they spent to make it good. There's still room for improvement, but as of right now, I could definitely recommend you pick this game up. The music is great, the art direction is stellar, and the bosses are fantastic as well. And I should mention that if you are wanting a game to play with a friend, this game actually does have 2-player online and IP local co-op as well. All the way down to some of the essence stones that you can find have effects that affect you and an ally. So this game is from the ground up playable from start to finish with a buddy. That will do it for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If this helped you and you enjoyed it, please leave a like on the video, subscribe if you guys are new, and comment down below what you think of this game and if you'll be picking it up as well. The engagement really helps smaller channels like mine with the YouTube algorithm. But have a wonderful rest of your day, guys. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.